Oh, hey, youth group. Hey, listen, live streaming didn't work out, so I had to record my sermon ahead of time, and oh, that's not gonna work. How are you guys? It's good to be here with you. It's me, Matt. Just to address the obvious at the start, it's me, Matt. It's not Ryan sitting here in front of you. I know an email went out. You guys have talked about it. Letters went home. So I think you guys know that Ryan has resigned as youth pastor. And I am going to be leading these virtual youth group meetings through the end of the year. That's all anyone knows. It's just we're going to get through this school year. And luckily we have great small group leaders. You guys all know your small group leaders, and that's not going to change. And most of you know me. And so it just made sense for me to do this for now, for the church. So that's what I'm doing. I'm new to streaming, so I'm not a streamer. So this is, please be patient with me. You know, I've tried to learn some things, and hopefully this is fun. So, yeah, so to speak of the obvious, who wants these bad boys? Huh? Could anyone use these? Running a little low yet? We've got plenty over here at the Lloyd House for now. So don't be too jealous. We'll put those aside. So how's your quarantine going? It's a little weird you can't answer, but I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, so just answer them like I'm there. So how is your quarantine going? The experts are saying right now that this is going to last for 3 to 5 months. I don't know if you knew that. Maybe you were thinking, oh, things are going to get back to normal next week. Yeah, they're not. We're going to be doing this for a while. I would guess your school year is probably over. Yeah, I would guess you're going to be home for the foreseeable future. So this is the best we can do to connect. I hope you're doing well with your family. You know, it can be hard to spend a lot of time locked in together. You probably know this. I have 2 young kids, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm married. My lovely wife, Brooke. We've been pretty much at home for, I think, 2 weeks straight already because my kids had the flu last week. And Brooke had the flu too, so we've been stuck here. So you might say, well, Matt, how's your quarantine going? I saw this video this week. I thought he answered it pretty well.
Because of coronavirus, you are going to be quarantined, but you have a choice. Do you A, quarantine with your wife and child, or B?
B.
Yeah, that's how I'm doing. That's good, right? B. Yeah. So my question for you guys is to start to think about the situation we're in is how prepared are you for your quarantine? Here we are a week in. So let's take a look at this chart. Maybe you can find out where you fall on this chart. Oh, your family is very prepared. You have all the food you need. Got the deep freezer in the full. The cupboards are stocked. You got rice and potatoes and frozen vegetables. Everything you need. You got a pile of books you've been meaning to read. Can't wait to start reading those. You got all those old board games and some new games. You're all stocked. You've got everything. You're very prepared. Who's in that group? Who's in the number 2, the kind of prepared group? Like the, as long as they don't close the grocery store, we're okay. You know, we're doing okay so far. We got a couple weeks of food. You know, if we can restock, things are going okay. So we're kind of prepared. Or maybe you're in the not prepared camp. Like, oh no, The fridge, it's already empty. Help us. Help us. I hope that President Trump shows up at the house with a big truck of food and toilet paper. We've got nothing. Help me. Or maybe you're in this fourth category and you're not really tracking so far with my talk. What's happening? I'm not a parent. I don't watch the news. All I know is it's spring break. Woo! I can't wait to get to Florida. When do I get to Florida for spring break? Quarantine? Outbreak? What? So you're probably in one of those groups. So, yeah. So thinking about where you are, let me ask you this. What would it take for you to rest comfortably during this time? However long this quarantine is, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatever it ends up being, what would it take for you to be totally at ease through this? Think about that for a second. What would you like your parents to have done? What do you wish the government had done or was doing? Right? Do you think, well, the government should be testing absolutely everyone? Whether you think you're healthy or not, you're going to get tested for the coronavirus. And if you're sick, you're quarantined. And they enforce those quarantines. That's what they did in some places like South Korea and China to eventually stop the outbreak. They locked people in their houses. They closed all the roads. So maybe that's what you think the government should do. Maybe that's what would make you feel at ease, knowing that everyone was tested and everyone was locked up. Maybe that would do it for you. Or maybe just lock everyone up, forget the testing, and the food delivery truck goes door to door. Everyone gets their rations of food and toilet paper, and no one is allowed to go out of their door or leave the house unless it's by an ambulance. Maybe that's what would make you feel at ease. Or maybe you just want everybody to let you do what you want to do. You just hope you don't get it, and you just want to go about normal life. You want to go to work. You want to go to school. Just forget that it's there. Maybe that's what you want to do. But I'm guessing there's something that in your mind you're saying, oh, this would put me at ease. This is how I want to spend this 3, 4, 5 months. So let's keep in mind our situation, our quarantine situation, as we talk about Ephesians tonight. So we're going to walk through the book of Ephesians. It's a book that has always comforted me in times of uncertainty, and I think that's where we are right now. I read a great book by a Chinese Christian named Watchman Nee, and the book is called Sit, Walk, Stand. And that's exactly how he breaks down the book of Ephesians. I've got it written out for you here. Let's try this slide. Okay, so the way Watchman Nee breaks this down is he says, the first 3 chapters of Ephesians, we will be sitting with Jesus. Well, what does he mean by sit with Jesus? What we're talking about in these first 3 chapters is, maybe a good way to say it is, it's theology. It's really rich theology. But it talks about how God sees us, our place in the world, our place with God. A lot of kind of really high ideals like justification and our place kind of in eternity with God. It deals with all these things, these really high truths. And after that, chapter 4, Paul switches gears, Watchman Nee notes, into a walk in the world. This is very practical. It's like, Okay, so you know these things are true about how God sees you. So now what does that mean for how you're supposed to live? And then the last section of Ephesians, as Watchman Nee breaks it down, is where we are strong and we are equipped to stand against Satan and evil. And he covers that chapter 6, verse 10 through the end of chapter 6. And that's the end of the book. That's it. So that's how Watchman Nee breaks down Ephesians. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about that first part, the sit part of Ephesians. Okay, just getting my notes in order. Okay, so what does he mean by sit? I'm going to read a couple of the verses. Obviously, chapters 1 through 3, it's a long section and it's very thick. It's beautiful, but it would take you some time to read it, dig through it, unpack it, and understand it. So I'm just going to read a couple verses that illustrate this idea of sitting with Jesus. What is he talking about? So from chapter 1, verse 20, it says, Jesus raised from the dead and seated at the right hand of God. So it's talking about Jesus' glorified position now. He lived life on this earth. He lived a perfect, sinless life. He died as a sacrifice, a substitution for us. And after he was dead for 3 days, he rose. He appeared to people. And then he ascended to heaven, where Scripture tells us he's seated at the right hand of God. You know, meaning he's equal with God. God has elevated him to that position. Being the Son of God, it makes sense. So what does it mean that we are sitting with God? In chapter 2, verses 5 and 6, Paul says, by grace you have been saved. He raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places. Okay, so here are two things I really want you to get from this verse. I know this is probably stuff you guys have heard before. Maybe you even know these verses. But catch this. First thing, we are seated with Christ. That's the starting point. It's not that, hey, because we know Christ, we get into the kingdom of heaven. No, what this says, catch this, is we are seated with him. That's the starting point for Ephesians, that we are seated with God. And the second point I want you to hear in this verse is that it's by grace. You hear that word all the time, grace. What do we mean by that? It's totally unearned. It's a gift from God that we don't deserve. So I think that's really the first step for us as Christians. If you remember when you became a Christian, most people would describe that as, I think essentially, realizing that you needed God, that you could not perfect yourself, that whatever you could do in life, it would never be enough, that you needed Jesus to give his grace to you, to give you his perfect life, his perfect standing before God, that he died as a sacrifice to be able to give you. So that is a key Christian idea. This is how Watchman Nee comes to say that we sit with God. Jesus has gone to the right hand of God, and we also, through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, are also seated with Christ. By grace. That's the starting point. Okay, so next Watchman Nee goes on to walk in the world. Right? And maybe that's what you're waiting for. Okay, Matt, tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Right? Just tell me what to do. Because isn't that kind of the pattern for you guys as kids, as students, right? The world is always kind of telling you what to do. Like a parent or a teacher, we lay out, these are the expectations. Once you do them, you get this reward, And that's the mistake people make, is they hear this first part, the way God views us, as unblemished, as seated with Christ, based on Christ's work for us on the cross, his death and his resurrection. And they gloss right over that, and they go right to the way the world, and normally we do life, right? Like, okay, if I do these things, then I'll get this reward. So that's what we want to get right to, right? Like the walk in the world. What do we have to do? But that's the big mistake. That's where we go wrong, is because we try to view our faith, and we try to view all the situations we're in as like, what do we need to do? And then what reward do we get, or what will we get out of it? Right? Like with faith, here's how people normally mistakenly look at it. They look at it like, I need to do all these things. I need to do the right things in my life. And if I live the right kind of life, then I'll be acceptable to God. And then I'll get to go to heaven. If I do the right things, I get to be seated with God. If I walk the right way, I get the right reward, seated in heaven with God. But that's not it. That's not what Ephesians is saying at all. Actually, it's saying the total opposite. What it's saying is, we have to realize that we are seated with God, that we are already forgiven, we are already made righteous. And it's not because of anything we did, it's the grace that we're talking about. It's the free gift of God, the grace to us that we get. And then, after we realize that we're seated with God in heaven, that is when it's time for us to walk in the world. It's not the other way around. It's not walk the right way and then you get to go to heaven. It's you're made righteous, you're acceptable, God loves you and he forgives you by grace. And then live out of that. And that's what the next section is. The walk is, okay, if you're already righteous, if you're already blameless, if God loves you, so then what kind of life do we live in light of that? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about is Ephesians, the first part, the sit part. So that's what Ephesians says, is you are seated with Christ, and that's that. That's done. Now, how do we live that's done? So that's the next part. That's what we'll talk about next time. And that's very different than this quarantine we're in, isn't it? Like we were thinking through at the beginning of this talk, for the quarantine, you've got to get prepared. If you want to feel comfortable, if you want to sit at ease, what do you need to do? You've got to get prepared. You've got to get everything ready. You need all the supplies. Then you'll be able to rest, right? Like once you have everything. You people who are very prepared, has this just been, vacation? This is great. No, I bet it hasn't, because you got to stay alert. There's all kinds of areas, like maybe your parents have lost their job temporarily. Maybe you have bills that it will be hard to pay, as a family, and you have to think about sacrifices. Maybe somebody's going to get sick that you know. Maybe you'll get sick. Maybe people will even die, right? You got to stay on top. You're not resting. Just because you're all prepared, you can't let your guard down on this thing, right? You got to stay fully stocked. You got to keep going to the store. Keep the shelves full. You got to, clean obsessively. Wash your hands so you don't get sick, so you stay safe, right? That's the way this world works, is you got to work if you want that result. And that's the way we get pulled into thinking, even as Christians. Even when we have something like Ephesians here telling us, think differently. Think about how God sees you and your eternal position, and then think about how to live your life in light of that. So, yeah, let's look at that this week. That's what I would like you to take this week. Is God, for all of us who believe in Him, He has said, "Come sit with me. My Son has died and made this sacrifice for you, and there is no enmity between us. We're friends. Come sit with me. Come learn from me. And when we're changed by that, then go live in accordance with what you've learned, with how you've been changed." So, in this quarantine this week, I want you to pay attention for the moments that you're not walking with God, where the world is leading you, where you're trying to get prepared, where you're trying to stay safe, where you're worried, where you're anxious, where you're afraid. Pay attention for those moments and what things make you feel that way. We're going to talk more about that next week when we talk about how to walk in the world. And then maybe also notice the moments where you do feel real peace, where you are trusting in what God says about you, that He loves you and that He works all things to good, even when they really don't look like they could possibly be good. He can still use them. So maybe notice moments where you do have that sense of peace, where you're saying to yourself, "Oh, okay, God's got this. God has me. I don't need to worry. I can trust Him." So my goal here is that we're going to try to watch this great music video. It's called White Owl. It's by Josh Garrels, who is a Christian artist that I really like. And this song is a representation of the Christian life. It's a pretty cool song, and it's got a cool video, so I am going to try to use my fancy new streaming software to play that for you. But if this doesn't work, or I don't know, if the video gets taken down, you can always go watch Josh Garrels' White Owl. And yeah, it's really cool. So let's see if I can figure this out, okay? Let's try. That's normal. Don't worry.
Don't know which way to go. Through the shadowlands and forgotten paths, you will find a road. Like an owl, you must fly in moonlight with an open eye and use your instinct as your guide to navigate the way that lays before you. You were born to take the greatest flight. Like a serpent and a dove, you will have wisdom born of love and carry visions from above into the places no man dares to follow. Every hollow in the dark of night, waiting for the light. Take the flame tonight, 'cause child of time building you into a home, shelter from the storm. Like a messenger of peace, the beauty waits to be released upon the sacred path you keep, laden deeper into the unveiling. As you're sailing across the great divide, like a wolf at midnight howls, you use your voice in darkest hours to break the silence and the power, holding back the others from their glory. Every story will be written soon. The blood is on the wall. Morning will come soon. 'Cause child of time has come for you now. You will never be alone. Every dream that you have been shown will be like a living stone, building you into a home, shelter from the storm.
That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that song. I think it's great. Cool visual representation of the gospel. So now, hopefully, your small group leaders are going to join you on some kind of video call. If you don't know about that, text them or call them and try to figure that out. It might not be perfect this week, but try your best to get some kind of contact with them. I've given them a couple questions to lead the discussion. So hopefully this happens, and if it doesn't, we'll learn and do it better next week. Okay, bye.